Hi, everybody. Welcome to our very first webinar in our 5-part kitten management series. We're so excited to be kicking this off today. Thank you for being here. Before we get started, I just want to mention a couple things. Want to take a moment to really just thank Royal Canin for making this webinar series possible, and Maddie's for hosting it. Couldn't do anything without our partners, and we're extremely grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today talking about our favorite thing, kittens. Kicking us off, we have intake decisions for animal shelters. Dr. Kate Hurley, who, as you know, is Million Cat Challenge co-founder, along with Dr. Julie Levy, and director of the Correct Shelter Medicine Program, will be walking us through decision making for animal shelters. And then we have special guest Hannah Shaw, you know her as the Kitten Lady. We'll be having a great conversation with her, and she'll be staying with us for Q&A. So we're super excited for her time today too. So here we go. Let's get started. Kate Hurley, please take it away.
So in this session, this kickoff session, I want to just sort of begin to wrap our minds around what are the needs of kittens in North America, and what is the right role for the shelter, and then talking with Hannah, the Kitten Lady, about how we can partner more effectively with all the many people outside of the shelter who also love kittens and want to help them. And really, how do we find kitten management strategies that are successful and leveraged, and really use what each person, each group's unique abilities are. We initially called this kitten diversion, and then when we were talking with Hannah a couple weeks ago in preparation, we were like, should we really talk about diversion? Like, that seems kind of negative. And then we took the time at that time to look up the definition of diversion and realize diversion is not the same as rejection. It is not the same as turning away. It is really to change course, to turn from one direction to another. And I think that really will underlie our success in managing the enormous influx, mountain kitten, as we call it, that hits shelters every year, more effectively and more humanely, both for kittens and for the rest of the animals and people in shelters. And really now more than ever, as we deal with COVID-19, and shelters need to be more cognizant of operating within capacity and avoiding overcrowding, because we're working with lean staff. We're trying to limit the amount that the public comes and mills around in shelters. We're trying to really make sure that we have adequate housing to keep cats healthy and well, and not have outbreaks of disease in our cats to add to our troubles and concerns. And so breaking away from what has historically been a pathway where when people find kittens, whether they're with a mother or not, oftentimes the default pathway has been just bring them on in, bring them into the shelter. And I remember a morning early in my residency in shelter medicine, so about 20 years ago now, a summer morning in Sacramento, where we were just processing animals that had been dropped in the night drop at the Sacramento County shelter that still had night drop boxes at that time. And by lunchtime, we had processed over 100 kittens that had been dropped off that way. We've gotten a lot better, but I still think there's a lot of room for us to be able to have more success in communicating with community members about what is the right pathway for kittens based on their ability, the kitten's needs, and the shelter's ability, all considered holistically. So in this first session, we're going to talk about just like to admit or not to admit broadly for our animal shelters, and how to communicate with the public if the best choice maybe isn't for that kitten to come into the shelter that day. And then the rest of the sessions will delve into, depending on what pathway the kittens go down, how to make sure that pathway is a safe one and leads them to a positive outcome in the end. So if you've been following my adventures in the Million Cat Challenge, a lot of you will have seen this slide. This is me, gosh, about 30 years ago now. And I meant so well. And to me, there was one pathway for cats that were stray, lost, in need, just found out and about, and that was into the shelter, to either find homes if we were able, to return home if their owner came to get them, or to be humanely euthanized if we weren't able to reach one of those two outcomes. And as hard as it was when we were overcrowded, when the cats got sick, when we didn't end up being able to find a live outcome, really believe this was the best tool to meet all of these really good goals, which are the same goals, the exact same goals that I think we all still have today. Get lost cats home, find homes for cats that need them, prevent the suffering of cats out in the field, and reduce feline overpopulation. But then over time, we learned more about what really is the best tool to accomplish those good outcomes. And this was a presentation that's Julie Levy and John Cicerelli and I at Expo in 2013 in Nashville, where we talked about radically rethinking our response to cats. We talked about things like managed admission and providing alternatives to intake, but the most sort of radical idea that we presented there, and it was just like very much in the air at that conference that year and in the field in general, was what has come to be called return to field, which was to, if a cat came in good body condition, with no exigent danger at the location of origin, no big nuisance dilemma unfolding. There's not 37 cats all pooping in a daycare center sandbox, but just a healthy cat in good body condition coming in, regardless of the person's intent when they brought the cat in. The cat was sterilized, vaccinated, ear-tipped, and returned to the location of origin. Originally, that arose as an alternative to euthanasia for those feral cats that were just unsuited to a pet home situation, or for those cats that were friendly but were just in excess of the number that the shelter was able to find homes for, perhaps in the middle of summer when there was a huge influx of kittens competing with the adult cats that were less obviously adoptable to many members of the public. But what we came to understand, and a lot of you have heard all of this, and if not, we have the previous feline superhighway webinar that we would refer you to. We came to understand that sterilizing, vaccinating, and fast tracking healthy cats, whether friendly or feral or somewhere in between, was also a fast track to returning cats to their owners who might not ever have thought to come to the shelter, but were delighted to have their cat back. And it served as an introduction to the idea of sterilization for many people who didn't know that that was even a possibility or accessible, or who lacked the language or the transportation or the money to take advantage of that service. And we also came to understand that sterilizing and returning friendly cats, oftentimes those cats weren't lost at all. But if they had come to the shelter and gone on to a new adoptive home, they were being taken out of a home where they were valued, but maybe in a poor community where the people didn't have access to sterilization services in the first place. And perhaps the most profound thing that I have learned since we first started talking about return to field is that in Pets for Life communities, in most underserved communities, only 3% of adoptions of pets there are adopted from an animal shelter or a rescue group. The other 97% are derived from the neighborhood of origin. And in the past, when we removed cats from those communities and adopted them out to new people, we were disrupting the families of the most vulnerable communities, where those connections are so important in a way we would never want to do. And so I've come to think of return to field as really a misnomer. It really is return to home. It's a way of supporting families and cats in staying together and adding that missing piece of spay-neuter services. And so when we integrated that with our other strategies, with alternatives to intake, with managed admissions, with removing barriers to adoption, we found out that it's really a better way of serving all these goals. It's the right tool for the job. And I have this picture of a hairdryer and a hammer because I sort of think of using our, there still is a time for the shelter as a pathway for people, for cats that owners can't keep them, or for cats that are in a dangerous situation or are in a sensitive habitat, or that aren't healthy, they aren't doing well, they aren't thriving where they are. Is still a great tool. But using the tool of the shelter for cats that really just need to be sterilized and returned to where they were already thriving and where they already had homes was like using a hammer to blow dry our hair and a hair dryer to hammer in a nail. Not only did it not work very well, it kind of hurt, right? And so now we've sorted out our tools for adult cats much better. And we now have the data to know that it worked. And it worked not only in terms of lowering euthanasia, which is not a surprise, but in follow-up on 2 robust return to field programs over a period of years involving over 10,000 cats in both cases. Euthanasia due to upper respiratory infection down 99%, so healthier cats, so important at this time with COVID, with the concerns about potential reverse zoonotic transmission of that disease to cats from humans. Cats picked up dead on the road down 20 to 24% in these 2 different studies. So evidence of less roaming, less suffering, less danger to cats out in the field, and intake down between 29 and 38% in these 2 studies. So evidence of fewer cats out and about in the world, right? Evidence of fewer cats preying on birds, evidence of fewer cats shedding harmful pathogens in the environment, evidence of less suffering for cats out in the field. And I just thought I noticed when I put on this shirt this morning that I was wearing the shirt from the Million Cat Celebrations. I don't know if you can see this, but it has the total from the first 4 years of the Million Cat Challenge, 1,148,129 more cats saved. Here's a little peek at my tattoo celebrating the occasion. Now you're going to get a tattoo flash on this webinar, did you? Celebrating the occasion that we came together, and cats had just been this long-standing problem in animal sheltering. And in just 4 years, a year ahead of schedule, shelters came together and saved over 1 million more cats against their own baseline by matching the right solution with the right problem. And I just checked the Million Cat counter this morning, and it now stands at 2,541,756 more lives saved by Million Cat shelters against each shelter's own baseline before joining the challenge. So, huge victory. Honestly, one that is funny, like, talked about this so much. And it still makes me verklempt to think about my 25-year-old self bringing in cat after cat after cat, so earnestly wanting to do the right thing, wanting to protect them, wanting to care for them, wanting them to have safety and love and all the great things cats should have. And just not knowing at the time what was the way to make that happen, like how close that solution was, and yet how far away it seemed. And I think now we really come to what I hope in a way is like the final frontier for sheltering and cats, which is the babies, the very most vulnerable, the very cutest ones. We know that still in animal shelters today, more than 2/3 of the animals that lose their lives are cats. And our work now with shelters that have implemented robust return to field programs and managed admission and the other initiatives of the Million Cat Challenge, most of that risk falls on the neonates, on the babies. What is the right tool for this solution? How can we come together so that our capacity is matched with the need that is out there in the world? With that, I'm going to switch gears for a minute to a true life adventure that I had just a couple of years ago, right about this time of year. This is the view from my front door. And at the time, there was an old lady living across the street. She was in her late 80s. And she had lived there since 1952 when she bought that house new. And on this day, her daughter, who was herself in her 70s, came over and said, "Oh no, I know you're a veterinarian. My mom told me, and there's an injured crow and the other crows are attacking it. And I'm afraid that my mom's dog is going to get out and hurt it or kill it." And so instantly I went into full-on animal control officer mode and I rushed across the street, and sure enough, here was this raggedy looking baby. It had some bald spots and it was clueless and it was sort of flopping around out there in her yard. And she had a big dog that she was keeping in the house, but we didn't know how long that could last. And there's crows flying all around and like calling and freaking out. And so I went into full-on officer early mode, and I got a box from across the street, and I got a towel, and I wrapped the little bird up and carried it back with me across the street. And like in my mind, that was like, dun 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 dun. And I sat down in my living room feeling very smug, and the old lady was grateful and her daughter was grateful, and they were like, "Oh, thank God you lived across the street and you were there to save the day." And then I thought, I wonder what I should do now. I'm looking at this little bird. And so I did what people do. I went to the Google. And this is literally what I typed in. Now, I guess I'll ask the Google. You notice the third choice is "help, I shrunk my family." Apparently that's a common search. This looks helpful. Yeah, just what I was looking for. So I found this website that had literally the phrase that I had searched for. Immediately, I reaffirmed my sense of myself as a hero. Clearly, this crow can't fly. It has a habit of making bad decisions. It's ill-prepared to face life out of the nest. And I was like, yes, they read my mind. I know how good I am. But then I read on, and I started to experience a sinking feeling. Now this baby crow has been separated from its parents, and it might actually have reduced its chances of survival. I learned some things, that crow babies leave the nest before they are completely flighted. During this time, they are still in the care of their parents, who will continue to feed and defend them. So maybe all the crows that were flying around and cawing weren't attacking it. Maybe they were giving it advice. And they don't need my help, and they're better off if I give them a wide girth. And they had a picture of a baby crow. And I looked at that picture, and I looked at the blue eyes of the little crow I had just rescued, and I was like, yep, I think that's what I did. But, I'm a veterinarian, and I have spent a lot of years reading about birds in the context of learning about cats and how we can support the coexistence of both species. And so I happen to know that even under normal circumstances, baby birds have as much as an 80% mortality rate. And so I could put that crow back, and that could be the normal course of things, but still, he would be at some risk out there in the world. So I looked into it again, and I was like, well, if I have the time and the resources, could I hand raise a baby crow?
Okay, Google. If I'm willing to put in the time, the question is, can I hand raise a baby crow? Let's see. Okay, Cornell. That seems reputable. Got a great vet school. They probably know about birds. All right.
So I start reading the Cornell website, and I start going down the long list of disadvantages of orphaning a baby crow in order to hand raise it. And there's a number from, nutritional stresses, behavioral stresses, but this was the part that really jumped out at me, and it was strikingly harsh. Do you know the mental state of that animal? Do you know when it's scared? Are you comforting it, or are you stressing it? This is one of the biggest arguments for why it's legal to shoot crows, but illegal to keep them as pets. It's torture for them, for a wild animal to be kept in the care of a human. And so I was like, okay, I get it. As long as the baby is mostly feathered and being attended by its parents, it's just where it needs to be. But they gave me one option, so I didn't have to just go back with my tail between my legs. I could put it up in a bush. I could make a little makeshift nest for it out of a box. So I went back across the street. I dragged a little step ladder with me. I told the lady and her daughter what I had read, and then I was going to put it way back up in the bush so it would be safe, but its parents would be looking after it. And no sooner had I taken my picture to post on Facebook of my hero's journey with the little crow, then it called, and these two crows that were sitting on two pine trees next door called back, and then immediately started dive bombing my head. So I had to race out of the yard. So I learned, it really was true. Those parents were there. They were waiting. They were freaking out. And they were so relieved when I brought Junior back. So here we are, 25 minutes into this thing. And now, finally, shall we talk about kittens? One of the challenges that we have in balancing what we're able to offer kittens through shelters, through foster homes, through community safety nets, through anything, is the fact that this is an incredibly prolific species. This is from a statistic that was more common a few years ago than it is now, but you can still find it. In fact, I've blocked out the name of the shelter from whose website I got this, because this was current, and it's been around so much that not to blame if you still have heard that and think be true, because it is true that cats can have 3 to 5 kittens per litter, and cats can have multiple litters per year. And so by the math of that, one cat can produce hundreds of thousands of cats in just a few years. And there's a lot of cats out there in the world. 30 to 80 million community cats in the United States, about 2% of which are estimated to be sterilized. So a while ago, a statistician looked at that statistic of how many cats a cat can have and how many cats would occur if that just kept breeding unchecked. And takes this mythical cat and let her and her offspring reproduce at that theoretical rate. And in just 18 years, from a single cat, you'd have a cat population of 50 trillion and a catastrophically huge feline colony weighing 120 billion tons. Yikes, you thought kitten season was bad, right? So why? Why aren't we buried in a layer of cats 3 miles deep? Here's the thing that is really challenging, is that risk is built into the survival strategy of many species that have multiple offspring per season. It's a strategy of many bird species, many eggs in the nest, many nestlings that hatch out of those eggs, recognizing that there are risks and changes in the environment. And this strategy allows rapid adaptation. So if one year the food is abundant, habitat is abundant, predators are low, many of those nestlings can survive. If there's another year that's leaner, fewer nestlings will survive, but they make sure that they always absolutely max out the carrying capacity of the environment, whatever it is. That's true of birds, and it's also true of cats. So cats also have this same breeding pattern that has risk by design. They overbreed for the carrying capacity of the environment, knowing that by that means they will be sure of always filling that bucket right to the brim, however big that bucket is in a given year. So there's similarities, tremendous similarities between baby birds, baby bunnies, and baby cats. But there's some important differences too. Baby birds, baby crows, exist in the wild, period. There are not pet crows living in households, or there generally aren't, there shouldn't be probably. But cats exist in the wild, right? There are free roaming cats that are born unsocial, out and about in the wild and live their lives out in the wild. But they also exist as pets. And sometimes we can tame those feral cats, and especially if we get them early enough, we can turn them into pets. So there's some fluid inter-exchange between those two populations. And feeding is often supplemented for cats, which artificially increases the size of that bucket, the number of litters, and the size of the litters that are born. But on the flip side, we have the opportunity to surgically control reproduction, which we can't do for birds. And we have publicly and privately funded rehoming, relocation, and euthanasia programs for cats, which we don't have for birds. And so we have the sense that all cats should be managed sometimes through those programs, where we would never think that for bunnies, for baby bunnies, or for baby birds, right? We would never think that every time you find a litter of baby bunnies, you should intervene and bring that into the shelter to enter into a foster program and ultimately tame and rehome. But because cats look just like cats, feral cats and domestic cats look just the same, we tend to treat them the same way. And I think most importantly, cat's way and bird's way is not our way. This is a type 3 reproductive curve, where this is the percentage of surviving offspring over the lifespan. And so you can see for a type 3 survival curve, I hope this isn't too esoteric, a very small percent of offspring survive throughout the lifespan. So an example of like the truest type 3 survival curve is like a fish that spawns thousands and thousands of eggs, knowing that maybe only 1 or 2 of those eggs will survive, right? But that's enough if it's enough to replace that one fish, right? Whereas we are more of a type 1 survival curve. We have very few offspring, relatively speaking, but the vast majority survive through adulthood and into old age. And that is one of the deepest instincts that we have, right? Is the desire to protect our precious few young. And I think that's important to acknowledge, because basically we are trying to bend the cat's survival curve towards one that looks more like our own. In a way, you can think of it kind of as like this biological imperialism, where we're trying to make their strategy look more like our strategy. Their strategy of having lots of young with lower survival look like our strategy of having very few young with high survival. And we just have to recognize, of course, we want to do that. It's our deepest instinct to have that pattern create, to be fulfilled, because that is how our species survives, is by protecting young, by protecting a few precious young. But we also have to recognize, in trying to create a world where cats have very few offspring with a high survival rate, we are working against millennia of evolution, and it's going to be a lot of effort. In case you missed that fancy animation, I'm going to play it again. Look closely. Trying to bend this curve. Look at those little sweat drops. That is the fanciest thing I did in this whole presentation. Hope you appreciate it. Here's what we know won't work. This is a strategy that never works with litter-bearing species that have this sort of type 3 survival strategy. If you remove members of that species and you don't change the carrying capacity of the environment, the remaining members of the species use their strategy, and instead of having fewer young, they have larger litters. And until the carrying capacity is refilled, there's higher survival. And so you actually, not only do you not decrease the number of individuals present, you increase the amount of birth, which increases the amount of risk, and you increase the number of individuals present by destabilizing the age and dominance structure. So when coyotes were removed, litter size doubled, and coyote populations more than rebounded because the environment could support more younger individuals. Same thing happened with cats. When up to a third of cats were removed without changing the carrying capacity of the environment, so opposite of what we're doing with return to field programs, the number of cats present at the removal site increased by as much as 211%. So removing cats and removing kittens without going back and doing anything at the point of origin, just willy-nilly bringing kittens into the shelter, rehoming them, whatever happens later, it's not going to work, because it's not going to solve this fundamental problem that cats always bring back to the carrying capacity of the environment. That's the end of the depressing part of this. Here's what might work. If we're going to fight millennia of evolution, if we're going to bend a type 3 survival curve to match a type 1 survival curve, I think we can do it, or at least we can make a lot of headway. But we're going to have to be smart about it. We're going to have to think upstream. Even when we get stuck downstream, we're going to have to swim our way back upstream consistently and with determination. We're going to have to work in balance with our capacity and grow our capacity a little bit before we take on a little bit more, instead of taking on a little bit more before we've grown our capacity. Because we know that working over capacity leads to disease, leads to stress, leads to burnout, leads to turnover, leads to reduced capacity. We have to work within capacity. We have to help our community members. We have to help our foster parents to work within their capacity. We have to say no to false dichotomies that make us choose between two bad options. We have to find the best win-win solution that we can create. And we have to recognize the deep human emotion that goes into it, that goes into us protecting our young, and that goes into us having the drive to protect our most vulnerable baby kittens. So let's talk about using our brains, using our big rational selves. What's the smartest place to invest our resources? And this is a paper that was written by a lot of super smart people, including my co-partner in crime, co-founder of the Million Cat Challenge, Dr. Levy, looking at the best way to prevent deaths of kittens. And the winner by far, these blue bars, number of preventable deaths. Blue is kittens, red is adults. So you can see the numbers are by far the lowest with high intensity sterilization. That's the place to invest our resources. And when kittens do present either to the shelter or to a rescue partner or to a foster home, I hope Hannah and I can talk a little bit more about this. This is a way to help let that kitten help us target our high intensity sterilization efforts. Why? Because by definition, if that cat came into a shelter, then there is a mother cat out there, almost certainly, right? And so we can follow that kitten and backtrack it to where that mother kitten is. And I think this is a place where there's really a lot of opportunities for partnerships between shelters and rescuers and advocates in the community to make sure that when a kitten comes in, there is always at least an effort made to track back to where the mother is, to super target our high intensity efforts to those kittens most likely to present as vulnerable and come into a shelter system. So we got to think upstream, and then we also got to recognize, remember, there's 30 to 80 million cats out there in the world, not to mention all the pet cats that there are out there, some of whom haven't gotten sterilized just yet. So we need to be able to triage what are the kittens that most need our help, and then align that with the capacity that we have to help. So we don't want to be helping kittens that are already doing pretty okay when we only have the capacity to help a very limited group of kittens. Then we got to build our capacity to help the kittens even that are pretty okay if we want to bring those also in under our tent. So this is from the Kitten Lady, and I really like the way it's holistic. It goes beyond sort of what we used to say is wait 4 to 8 hours, and if the mother doesn't come back, then scoop to the kittens up. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, nobody does that. Like, nobody really sits and watches a mother cat for 4 to 8 hours. And even if they don't happen to see her come back, if the kittens are in good shape, they're robust, they're happy, they're fat, they're healthy, they still don't, you probably just missed that mom came. So they still don't need intervention. So she asks, and I think there's more and more good flowcharts out there that have that, assessing the condition, the age, and the situation, recognizing, if they're in a box in the blazing sun in a supermarket parking lot, okay, that's different from being under a bush in a pretty safe place in a backyard or an alley somewhere. And then the ability, this is directed to an individual, but from a shelter's perspective, how many foster homes do you have? What capacity do you have to provide the really necessary, excellent double compartment housing that is required for healthy, safe care of cats in a shelter? Do you have the staff for care and management, both of cats that are in the shelter itself, but also in the foster care system that requires some attention? Do you have the medical and surgical capacity to meet the needs of all of those cats and kittens? And then do you have the outcome pathway? When that wave comes through and all those kittens are old enough, do you have the adoptive home so that they'll have the outcome that they deserve? Hang on one sec. My neighbor is dropping by. I'm on a webinar. Life during quarantine. This is a sort of level thing that I thought that we could play with maybe. really at the center, thinking that sick and injured is where, oftentimes shelters are best equipped to respond to that. You may have access to medical services and the ability to really understand how serious that is. And I think the next sort of level of urgency for shelters to focus their resources on is those that are in a dangerous situation, as I said, in a supermarket parking lot in the hot sun, or where it's documented that they're truly orphaned, recognizing that still the appropriate place for those is ideally outside of a shelter, but maybe there's more importance for there to be communication with a shelter that can provide guidance for how to care for those, or at least hook those people into some resources for care and other reputable sites. And then I have question marks because I'm like, well, which is more important than social kittens with mom? Like, that's kind of stable. You can really help people to keep those kittens safely outside of the shelter until they're old enough to be rehomed, and maybe even help people rehome them. And feral kittens with mom, and maybe we can talk about like who has more urgency. Here's the pirate to help me get through the last little bit. And I think sort of moving on from that, from our little expanding circles of capacity, is this idea of replacing false dichotomies with win-win solutions. And I think sometimes this is something that happens internally, and sometimes this is something that happens more in terms of how the shelter is perceived, and some like sort of the pushback that comes on social media, where people are so accustomed to one way of responding to kittens, which is find kittens, don't wait for mom, don't assess their health, just bring them to the shelter and the shelter will figure that out. And just like me with my baby crow, I just thought, like, find crow, bring to a wildlife rehab center, right? And so we need to talk about and think about ways of framing this so it's not a false dichotomy of like, the kittens will die if they don't come into the shelter. Well, how are the kittens doing now? Are they okay? Can you provide mom with food and water and shelter where she is? Or bring her safely into your home? Or here's another one. Open admission shelters can't turn animals away, no matter how full they are. Like, they have a legal obligation to take in everything. We can take it in, but if all our foster homes are full, can you maybe just hang on to it for a day or two? Can we help you with that? Can we help you find someone else who can help you hang on to it for a day or two? This is our only chance to sterilize the mom. Well, can you care for the kittens until they're weaned and then bring her in so that we don't stress out a feral mom and we don't disrupt that family and we don't institutionalize a feral mom in a shelter setting until the kittens are old enough to be taken from her? So how can we find solutions that aren't as dire, that aren't as sort of extreme as the ones that sometimes are presented to us or that our fearful selves come up with? And I thought maybe these are some basic principles that we could always work towards. I think that we can really agree on. The kittens are better off with their mothers, and mothers are better off with their kittens until the kittens are at least barely old enough for weaning. And if they're feral, maybe we want to really like push that to the very earliest age possible so we can socialize them. But until weaning, kitten's place is with mom. And ideally, cat family's place is not in a shelter. Until the kittens are old enough to be placed for adoption, ideally the family stays out of a cage and in a more natural situation. For a social cat, inside of a home. For an unsocial cat, for a very fearful cat, maybe they're better off actually staying outside if it's in a safe place. Or if they're in a non-safe place, if it's, backyard where there's a big dog or near a busy road, in the bright sun, maybe they can be provided with shelter and a safe place, but without a lot of contact with humans until the kittens are old enough to be taken and socialized. And then we can really reserve the shelter as the place to triage sick and injured kittens and facilitate adoption of friendly weaned kittens and provide spay-neuter services and assistance with kitten kits and guidance along the way. And so that takes me to sort of the final principle, which is to recognize the human emotion. And how do we talk about this with our community in a way that is positive and supports people's desire to intervene without allowing that to trigger a cascade of negative events, both for kittens, for mother cats, and for shelters that get overwhelmed and beyond capacity. So we want to just understand again the deep roots of the human desire to protect little ones. 357 million results in 0.42 seconds when you type kitten video into the Google. We love kittens. But also to remember that mother cats have been subject to the same evolutionary pull. They've been shaped in the same way to protect their little ones. And so it's not a neutral thing when kittens are taken from their mother cat, and it does cause, it's a different distress than what we feel, but it is distress. And so I think that's something that we as animal advocates and cat lovers need to respect and try and support, keeping those mother cats together when that can be done in a safe way. And know that you won't make all people happy all the time. This is true in all of sheltering and in so much of life too, especially in the social media age. So you might as well be criticized for doing the right thing with conviction, compassion, and flexibility to respond to different situations as they arise. So just like that website did with the crow, validate people's impulse towards being a hero. Recognize that, yes, you're doing the best thing you can. Your intentions are great. Explain from the cat and kitten's perspective in simple, clear language. Kittens need their mother. Give people positive steps to take no matter what. Whether they're going to bring them into a shelter if they're sick or injured, or they're going to make the situation safer by offering some shelter that a mother cat could take advantage of, by making sure that she has food and water nearby in case she's thirsty so she doesn't have to leave her kittens, by bringing the kittens into the house and caring for them, whatever is appropriate for that situation. Give people positive steps to take. And that's what this whole campaign and webinar series and partnership with Royal Canin is all about, is giving people those resources to be heroes in a good way. So we have the feline superhighway really was about fast tracking those healthy adult cats back sterilized, vaccinated, to their homes in the community where they're thriving, whether that's with somebody who just needed that extra piece of the equation filled in with the sterilization and the vaccination, or whether that's a cat that was thriving in its community home. Really reserve our shelter superhighway for those own cats that can't stay in their home and can't be rehomed by the owner, and for those cats that are sick, injured, not thriving in a dangerous or problematic situation and the victims of cruelty, abuse, and neglect. And for kittens, bringing adoption age kittens in and really fast tracking those kittens into homes. But now we also need to define what is our superhighway for neonates. It was a missing piece of this presentation. Where is the fast track for those healthy, fat, roly-poly, 4-week-old kittens with a mother? Can we fast track them to stay right where they are? What is the fast track for the feral kittens? What is the fast track for the 8-week-old kittens that someone has found? And so that's where we're going to go with the rest of this series, and where I hope that I can go in my conversation with Hannah Shaw, the amazing Kitten Lady, who has really done the side of this for the finders of the kittens out in the community.
All right. Can you hear me?
We can hear
I
you.
can.
So thank you
Awesome.
so much for joining us, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to switch
Hannah-
and I'm going to share my screen now, yeah?
Yeah, so I just want to share, Hannah Shaw, everybody, needs no introduction. The Kitten Lady was foster before foster was cool. She is over a decade trying to protect the most vulnerable species to enter our animal shelters. And Hannah, the reason we asked you to join us today is, like so many of you, we tuned in to your amazing webinar series a few months ago. And we just loved the content. We love materials. What we always love about your content materials is they're so clean, straightforward, aesthetically pleasing. You can just hand them off to your foster volunteers, get them trained. Nobody's going to do a better job. Just let Hannah do that work. But what really caught our eye this time is kind of what Kate already talked about with the CASA assessment. And so we wanted you to just kind of tell us, how did you come up with that? And where did that come from, and what brought you to that place? Because it's nuanced and you got it all on a one pager, and we were just like, yes, that.
Okay, so let me share your... Thank you so much. That's really sweet of you. Can you see my screen now?
We can.
Okay, great. So first of all, Kate, you are awesome, and I loved everything you said, and I totally felt it in my core when you said kittens are like the final frontier. I really have been saying that for years. I think this is like kind of the last piece of the puzzle we really need to figure out in the sheltering world. And so this is a new resource that I created. It looks really condensed here, but I'm going to break it down piece by piece. And I just want everyone to know this is a poster you can download as a PDF and give out to anybody that you need to. But really my intention with creating this like CASA method was helping both finders and shelters who are, you know, maybe dealing with people who are finding kittens outside, helping to figure out who do we need to prioritize, which kittens do need to be coming into a shelter, and which kittens maybe can come in a little bit later, which kittens maybe have a different outcome or don't need to be coming into a shelter at all. So what I'd love to do is kind of go through each of these things. The idea here is that if you work for a shelter and you are engaging with a member of the public who's called and said, help, I found a kitten outside, should I bring them in? The four things you're going to be asking are CASA. The first one is condition. So I'll show you what this looks like. So, you know, for a kitten who is in really good condition, that means, you know, they're chunky, they're well fed, they're not in distress, they look like a little, you know, chunky potato. These kittens, they're not dropped off by a stork, you know, they are in good condition because somebody's feeding them, and it's not the local raccoon, it's their mom. So we want to keep in mind that if they're in good condition, you know, you want to ask the person that. Ask them, do they look pretty clean? Do they look, you know, like they're not in distress? If so, mom's probably really close. Let's try to reunite with mom. And that can happen either in the person's home in foster care, that can happen, outdoors in an outdoor situation, or maybe it happens through a shelter or rescue program if there is the capacity for that. But we really want to be reserving our resources for those who are in not good condition. These are our kittens who are dirty, covered in waste, they're visibly underweight, they're in distress. So what kills me is when I get an orphan who looks like this. I get a lot of orphans who look like this. And, you know, these are probably not orphaned kittens truly, because these are kittens who are very chunky, healthy looking, clean. It's important to understand even just the biology of kittens at this age. They don't groom themselves at this age. So if they're clean, it's because their mom is cleaning them. So that's a good condition kitten. You know, then you look at a kitten like this one. These are all kittens that I've fostered. This is a kitten who was in really bad condition. She was covered in fleas, covered in waste. If you have a situation where there's a kitten who is found in an area where there's already other kittens who've passed away, these are the situations where we would maybe be thinking more, okay, we might want to intervene here, depending on the severity of the poor condition of the kitten. But the next thing we want to be asking about is age, because this really is a big determining factor in everything, how we approach this. Our kittens who are under 5 weeks of age are dependent on mom for nutrition and warmth and everything else that mom provides. So it's so important that if they are under 5 weeks, so they have blue eyes, they don't have all their teeth, they're not particularly coordinated. And these are the questions you can be asking someone, are they running around or are they kind of a little jelly bean sleeping under a bush? Do they have baby blue eyes or do they have green eyes? You can be asking these questions to assess how old is this kitten really? If they're under 5 weeks, we want to keep them with mom if we can. And if they are 5 to 12 weeks, these are our kittens who are that perfect socialization window. They are not dependent on mom for nutrition anymore. This is a really important time for them to be getting prepared for adoption if that is to be their pathway. So with these ones, I'm of the mind that, the earlier we can intervene with those weaning age kittens, the better. Get them socialized, get them vaccinated, dewormed, fast-tracked for adoption. Of course, with our older kittens, 12 weeks plus, these kittens are a little bit, take perhaps longer or maybe impossible in some cases, depending on how old they are, to socialize. Not the best use of a shelter's resources to be, taking a healthy 6-month-old kitten off of the street and putting them into a cage and hoping they warm up. So these are the types of ways that we want to be thinking about these things. What age are they? And that's going to help determine their pathway. Little guys here, let's try to keep them with mom. If we can keep them with mom in a foster home, even better. This was a feral mom and some babies that I fostered, and nothing easier than fostering a feral mom and babies. Mom does the work and you just open the cans of food for her. Weaning age kittens, get them socialized. And then for those older kittens, return to field is a great pathway for them. Then we want to look at the situation, safe situation or unsafe situation. Is the mom present? Is the caregiver present? Or is it an unsafe situation? Unsafe is, this is a kitten who came from an unsafe situation that I took in. Other kittens had passed away there. There wasn't a mom around. There wasn't anybody feeding there. Kitten was in poor condition and young. These are the kittens we want to preserve our capacity for, keep our space for, versus a situation like this. I mean, these little guys, I was doing a trapping project and there were 4 little kittens on site there. Here they are. And these kittens are healthy. So their condition is healthy. Their age is, they're right between nursing and weaning age. And their situation is actually very safe. These guys had a caregiver who was feeding them. And not just that, she was so concerned that we were going to take her kittens away from her. She was scared to even let us know that there were kittens in her yard. And of course, I told her, the last thing that I need is more kittens. If you want these kittens, please, we will help you keep these kittens. And in this case, they didn't need, they didn't need a shelter. They didn't need a rescue group. What they needed was just some resources, give them resources to get the cats, spayed and neutered at the age that is appropriate. And these kittens were able to stay in that backyard. So no urgency there. And then the final thing is ability. And that does go with personal ability. If you're asking a person who's found a kitten outside, you want to ask them to take some responsibility for that. Hey, do you have the ability to provide foster care to that kitten? If you don't, then you want to be looking at your capacity. Do we have the capacity do we have a long list of foster homes waiting for kittens, or do we not? And there's lots of different situations that can come here, and capacity is always going to come into play. A couple weeks ago, I found these kittens. I was doing a trapping project, and of course, where there are community cats, there are kittens. And I found these guys under a radiator. And, you can see they have eye infections. But other than that, they were in really good body condition. So I knew we would be able to find the mom. Of course, we did find the mom. And then the question is, are we going to leave these kittens here? Are we going to take them into foster care? My ability at that point was not I didn't have capacity in my home to take home a mom and babies. But in that situation, there was a local group that had space for mom and babies. So they took them in. Different type of situation. These kittens are some who were found outside. They were living in a barn and they were in good condition. They had a mom. Here she is. She's very spicy. And in this situation, there was no place for them to go. So I said, can you feed the mom? Can we leave them here until they are weaning age? And at that point, I will have space to take them in and fast track them for adoption. And that's exactly what I did. So there's those ones. So you can see, no two situations are going to be alike. I know this is kind of a complex way of thinking about it, but the reason that I wanted to create this resource, which you can download on my website, there's a link right there. The reason I wanted to create this is because I see a lot of, in the past, it was very like, if you find a kitten outside, just bring them in. Or the public thought, if you find a kitten outside, bring them into your home or bring them to the shelter. And then I feel like the pendulum sometimes would swing too hard in the other direction, where the messaging is like, if you find a kitten outside, leave them there. And the truth is, it's much more nuanced than that, or it ought to be much more nuanced than that, because no two situations are alike. We want to be considering what's their condition, how old are they, and what does that say about their needs? Is it a safe situation, an unsafe situation, and what's our capacity at this time and in this community? It's all going to, change, and that's why I love the superhighway concept. I think that it gives us an opportunity to kind of have one idea of what each pathway is going to look like, but also to have that flexibility that as we gain more information, we're able to make informed decisions based on the situation. So I hope this is a valuable resource to people. And I think we can kind of talk about that a little bit, or I don't know if you want to move on to something else, Mandy.
But Kate, can you comment on that really quick? So I think the superhighway, to Hannah's point, it is a superhighway. There's a path for each one of our felines, but there's exits on the highway. And why are there exits, Kate, and where are they?
Well, at first I just wanted to say that I love the CASA model because it recognizes that each person has a sort of spectrum of ability, like a spectrum of options depending on their ability. And I think also each shelter has a sort of a range of like, where should you intervene? Do you have a million foster homes? Like sort of put the message out there, like you find a group of kittens. We never want people to orphan kittens. But if you have a lot of foster homes, doors open, bring them on in. We got a foster home waiting. In fact, you don't even have to bring them into the shelter. We're going to call that foster home, send them out, do a curbside delivery. We're going to put them right in there. Another shelter doesn't have foster homes. Bringing the kittens in is going to mean they're sitting in a cage. There's kittens sitting in the cage next to them that aren't doing well. Their animal care staff is having to set an alarm to try and take a lunch break at 4:00 in the afternoon. Like then they're sitting there crying because there's so many kittens in the shelter. Like you're beyond capacity. And that's where we want to push harder on the message of, can you leave them there? Can we help you leave them there? So I think it's like a conversation between the shelter's capacity and the community members' capacity. And what I wanted to emphasize is that the community member, the best role for community members is to take care of kittens that are too young for adoption and keep them out of the shelter. The best role, the thing that community members cannot do is spay and neuter. Community members may be less sort of adept with facilitating adoptions. So shelters can be a really strong partner to facilitate the adoption process. Like we've got the machine, right, to place 100 kittens in a weekend. And community members don't have as easy of access to veterinary services as many shelters do. And so the shelter can be really a good place to triage those ones that are sick and injured. And so also staying, like defining the lanes on our superhighway and each group staying in their lane.
Yeah.
I think can be really powerful. It enables the shelter to help really robustly with like, yep, we got the spay neuter piece. Our vet staff is not exhausted because we don't have a panleukopenia outbreak we're dealing with. And so they're not running around like having to do antibiotic titers on all these sick kittens and running a quarantine. And so we are able to just like snap out the spay neuter surgeries and chase down the parents and all of that. And because we have the Kitten Lady army out there raising the kittens until they are old enough to make that transition.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything you're saying. And I think this is like the important thing about having boundaries, knowing your boundaries, setting your priorities and really sticking to them, because when we do that, we create more capacity to do to focus in the areas of greatest need. I think the other really important piece of this for me is that, you know, sometimes when we say, you know, leave them there, when I say leave them there, I never mean leave them there and never go back. What I mean is leave them there right now, they're okay, but let's acknowledge, you know, the fact that there is a population of cats there who is, you know, going to be kind of endlessly breeding without our intervention. And so that's the other piece that to me is really complicated here, but really important to acknowledge that every single kitten, regardless of whether they do become an intake or they, you know, get brought into that person's home, every single kitten is telling you something about what's going on in the community, which is that there is a free roaming population that is giving birth to a lot of cats. And that was the other piece that I know we wanted to talk about. I saw you put Chickpea in there, and I do have some fun photos that I can share if you'd like to see.
I just wanted
give us an
to
update,
finish up with this real
Yeah,
quick.
please.
You're answering a couple of questions that I see. Two variations on any tips for navigating the conversation with the reporting party for explaining why putting kittens back might be the compassionate right thing to do, and how do you get the public to understand that it is much more humane to leave them where they are. We have so many people who say we are cruel when we give advice to leave them where they are. They will get eaten. I have a couple of thoughts on that, but I wanted to hear your thoughts also, because
Sure.
you're not the one necessarily telling them to leave them where they are as much as the shelter is. You know, you're more like a positive. Nobody.
I don't think
for the last 3 decades that you should take them all in.
Sure. I think it is definitely like a false dichotomy to say that there's like the positive of take them in or the negative of leave them there. It's not really that at all. I think it's the reason that I think having conversations, whether we're having like conversations with adopters, conversations with community members who have cats in their yard, the conversation piece is so important, because when you just tell somebody, if somebody calls you and says, I found a kitten outside, and you say, leave him there, click. You and I know that the majority of people who find a kitten outside, they have compassion in their heart. They have that emotion you talked about. They're not going to just accept that. And I probably wouldn't either. If I was just I'd never seen a kitten before, I found one outside and the shelter said, leave them there. I'm not going to right off the bat trust that that's the right thing to do. I'm probably going to take that kitten in. Maybe I take that kitten in and now I don't have resources to know how to care for them. I don't have resources to know where I can get them vaccinated, or even that I should be getting them vaccinated eventually. Don't have resources for getting them adopted. Whereas a conversation enables the shelter to express, okay, well, we don't have the capacity to take in. Us taking in the kitten right now is not in the kitten's best interest. However, here's the resources we can provide you. Because to me, that's what a shelter really should be, is a resource center. We can provide you with the resources that you can foster this kitten yourself. We can provide you some materials about how to do that. We can provide you some education about how to do that. Maybe we can provide you some supplies. We can provide you with the spay neuter through our services that we have for kittens who are 2 pounds and up. I think that you're not telling somebody no, you're telling them, actually, here's how it will go. You know what I mean? So I think that that's why I love you saying it's not a dichotomy, because we never want to tell people there would be nothing that would serve us to say, leave that kitten outside and then never do anything about it again. Let them either pass away on the street or grow up and become a community cat who's going to give birth to more kittens, and we're going to be taking in even more calls in 3 months or 5 months. We want to be solving these issues. And I think that the idea of telling somebody don't bring that kitten into the shelter right now is not saying don't do anything about it. It's saying, let me help you figure out the right thing to do for this kitten. And honestly, most people just don't know. So I think that is the role of animal welfare professionals, is to know that you are the professional, you do know the right thing to do, and you can communicate that in a way that's compassionate, that does express that, like, that emotional connection with the person. Wow, I love that you're trying to help this kitten so much. Actually what would really be helpful for this kitten is X, Y, and Z, and here's some resources I can give you to make that happen.
And I think, just sort of to, one of the reasons I like the CASA model is, like, yes, so important to have individual conversations and assess the individual situation. At the same time, you're working in an animal shelter, you get 100 calls about this before lunchtime, and lunchtime is at 4, and so we also need simple graphics, flow charts, pathways on the superhighway that helps people figure it out largely for themselves, just in the same way that the Wildlife Rehab Center and, wildlife rehabbers in general have done a good job of spreading this message, and they've been working on it for 20 years of, like, don't steal the baby crow, don't steal the baby bunnies, here's what to do if you find them, here's how to assess whether intervention is required.
Right.
And so I think, it might sound overwhelming, but I don't think it has to be. And that's part of what this webinar series is about, is giving you the resources, the simple graphics, the simple PSAs, the simple social media posts to start to build the expectation in the community is, if we find kittens, the shelter's going to help us keep them out of a cage until they're old enough for adoption.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to remind everybody, if you want to use that poster, if you go to kittenlady.org/CASA, I have a PDF that you can download there. You're welcome to use that.
So I think it really is about giving people positive steps to take, whether that's, a feral mother and her kittens saying, put food and water nearby, keep an eye on them, if they seem to be going downhill, get back in touch. Or it's a friendly mom and say, like, when they're old enough, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we can help, hook you up with sterilization services, or you can even bring them in for adoption if we got the capacity. So always be focusing on what you are offering, and also hold steady. This is something we have trained the public to do, just like I have trained my cat to jump on my desk. Every time I put him on, he climbs back on. This is something that the public has expected for a long time. But I think I just want to say, like, in this time of the pandemic, we have an opportunity to up our game in terms of improving the community safety net for kittens. There are so many more reasons now than ever to keep kittens out of shelters and come up with solutions that are not leaving them to die and are not leaving them to suffer and are not abandoning the community, but inviting people to step up, use the resources that are out there, and serve those kittens so that the time they spend in the shelter is the time it takes to spay and neuter them.
I love that. And that is why, when you mentioned diversion in the beginning, I was thinking, that is one strategy, is like trying to turn the finder into a foster parent, because if you can do that, and if you can support them with that, rather than just saying, okay, fine, bring them to me, empower people. Because if somebody's already taken the time and they're out of their day to call the shelter or step into the shelter, they have some buy-in already, right? So let's see how far we can get them to go with that. Maybe we can turn them into a foster parent simply by having, kitten kits, giving them the education, giving them the empowerment, and then we're going to get a lot farther with that. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. Right now is such an opportunity, in so many different ways to kind of rethink the way we do all of this.
And for that nursing, especially that nursing mom outside, when she's safe and there's not the capacity to bring her inside in some situation that's not going to be massively stressful, how do you recommend supporting? This is a question that just came in. How do you recommend supporting that nursing mom outside? I have a nursing family behind my house, and so this is something that actually has happened to me. What would you say?
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to put this picture back up just because I love it. So here's a nursing mom outside, and you can see she's looking at me like, you better not turn me into a foster cat. And I'm like, don't worry, I don't need another foster cat. You're good.
I'll eat your face.
Yeah, in this situation, you know, I'm looking at her going, listen, you don't really need me and I don't need you. And what you need is food and a safe place to be. So like in this situation, you know, what this was a place that I physically went. I took this picture, and that was where she had chosen to care for her babies. It was like on a shelf. So all I did was say, okay, well, let's like give her some options, some nesting area options. You know, you can't tell a feral mom what to do. She's going to choose where she's going to choose, but can we give her an option such as like if you have like a dog kennel that you can put some bedding in, always keep mom's stuff a little bit far away from where you think she's going to be doing most of the care for the kittens, so that you can change out food and water in a way that's safe. But absolutely, you can, you know, I think that is a program that shelters could be doing is saying, you know, hey, we don't have space for feral moms and babies here, but we can bring you, you know, a little, whether it's a winter shelter or a kennel, if it's like an indoor type space, like a barn, and we can bring you some food and some water, and, you know, plan on coming back. I know there are some places that have these types of programs. They call them like kitten watch lists. And the important thing is just make sure you do go back, because if you wait too long, of course, those kittens will not be socialization age anymore. So make sure you know, set your alarm, make your spreadsheet where you have the dates of when it's time to go back and get them. But I mean, these are the babies that she had underneath her, and they're lovely and they got adopted. And, you know, we didn't have to utilize the capacity of the shelter or of my rescue during that time where she was nursing them. We were able to do that in a like organic environment.
And importantly, we're keeping kittens with their mother where we know they get the best care. But Hannah, we know mom's going to live to breed another day. How do we find her? Like when kittens are coming to our shelter, how do we trace back to mom?
Okay. I have a lot to say about this. Like, how much time do we have? Okay. So,
You're good.
So yeah, my big thing is, you know, caring for kittens is great. Emphasizing foster homes is great. If that's the only thing you're doing, we have to be doing more about the real root of this issue. And so I want to share quickly like the program that we have here in San Diego where I live, and then kind of how I think shelters can be tapping into a program like this. So this is Chickpea. She was in one of the slides earlier. Chickpea was a foster kitten that I took in. And to be totally clear, she came from the shelter. So she was from the shelter. She was transferred to my group. She had a bunch of medical problems, as do most of the kittens I take in. So lots of resources went into this. Multiple organizations, you know, expensive veterinary care, weeks of time. Here she is. She's a very cute little kitten. But what I require of any shelter that we work with is that they have to, if they have the origin address of the kitten, we require that they give us that information. And I have in the past had issues where we were told, you know, that might be a privacy issue. And I highly encourage that if that's a concern with your shelter, that you internally look at that policy and make sure that if a rescue group does want that information, there's some agreement in place that you can provide the origin address. Because here's what happens. We get the origin address of where Chickpea's from, and we go back. Study Chickpea's face, okay? She's a tuxedo with a cute little white mustache. We go back to the address where she's from, and who do we find? Right? So we found 35 cats. Most of them look like this. This is, you know, these are all different cats. They look like they're the same cat because they have strong genes, I guess. But not only did we find 35 cats, many of whom were pregnant, we also found a lot of kittens. More kittens had come into the shelter from this address. These are kittens, obviously, with serious health issues going on. These guys had mange. And actually, these two did end up going back to that same shelter where they're currently in a behavior program. They're getting treated for mange and in foster care. I just took these photos like a week ago. And so I share these because I feel like it is very important for us to, you know, I know how hard it is because I run a program like this. It's easier said than done to say, every time you get a kitten, go back to where they're from and TNR all of the cats. I think, Mandy, I was telling you, for every kitten I rescue, we sterilize probably 10 to 12 cats because we go back and we do our sterilization program at that site. So, you know, depending on your organization's intake of kittens, that could be a lot of cats. I think it is it's a big undertaking, but it is certainly a goal worth marching towards. I have a couple other photos just to share because it's fun. What I do is I take a picture of my kitten, my foster kitten, on the left, and then on the right is a cat I found at the colony. So there's Cider and someone I found at his colony. This is my foster kitten, Cherry. And, you know, I go back and it's like, okay, well, if these are really orphans, then who's that? Like, who's this? Because they look very, very similar, right? The genetics are very strong here. Time and time again, this is what you're going to find if you go back to the place where the kittens are from. So I think of kittens as like the canary in the coal mine. Like every kitten that comes into you is sending you a message. And the message is like, danger, danger, something is going on where I am from, you know, and they're telling you, hey, you know, in Chickpea's case, had we not done a sterilization program there, I mean, the volume of kittens who will continue coming in from that colony with mange, with health problems, with eye infections, you know, it's like, it's kind of unending. And so that is for me, the biggest piece of all is if you're going to be working with kittens in any capacity, try to have some kind of program to address the existence of all of the cats outside, because every single one of them is sending you a message. And that's why I love capturing these side-by-side photos.
I think that's a great segue too. We're running out of time. Time flies when we're talking kitten. We're really down wire. And we have two questions here. And this question always comes up, and we've done an entire webinar just on this. And Kate, it's your webinar, so I'll let you answer this quickly. Can you walk us through doing TNR, putting the cat back, and the damage that does to wildlife? It's a complicated. It took an hour to explain.
I answered that one just in brief. Remember, when cats were removed, increase in the population of as much as 200% in the face of robust return to field programs, returning over 10,000 cats to the community. Hit by car went down, intake went down, evidence of cat overpopulation reduced. Fewer cats is a win for cats. It's a win for wildlife. But much more to that, as you said.
Yeah, and I think also there are plenty of studies and also anecdotal evidence from my years of doing this that even the numbers of kittens being brought into shelters is dramatically decreased in communities that do have robust sterilization programs for community cats. We see orphaned kitten intake decreasing in some communities by as much as 40% in a couple of years. So as the person who's always fighting for the little guys, I am like so in favor. And the thing that I keep saying is look at a colony like Chickpea where she came from. Who is going to tell me that me sterilizing 35 cats in the place where a kitten came from is harming the shelter? I mean, the shelter should be so thrilled about a member of the public doing this for them, right? Because it really is impacting the shelter. That's less mangy kittens for you to deal with. That's less eye infections for you to treat. It really is not just a win for the shelter, for the taxpayer, for the neighbors in that community, but it is also a win for wildlife. And I actually used to work for a wildlife organization, and I am very passionate about wildlife. I think the important thing to remember there is that we're not talking about putting cats outside. The cats are already outside. We're talking about sterilizing cats who are already outside. So I think that's the most important. If there's one sentence you could say to someone who doesn't understand it, it's the cats are already outside. We are sterilizing the cats who already exist in these populations. And whether you love cats outside or you don't love cats being outside, the cats are outside. So what are we gonna do about it, right?
Exactly.
That's what I love.
Last question, perfect. Go ahead, Kate.
That's what I love about the Chickpea story. as what's so powerful about those return to field studies that I showed. And that's why I showed you, like, there's the science right there. Those shelters have been operating for decades, taking in 10,000 cats a year, 10,000 cats next year, 10,000 cats the year after. How many thousands of cats hit by car, dead on the road? No change, just going up, getting worse, until return to field. And then intake goes down. Cats hit by car, dead on the road, go down. And the thing is, bringing the cat in was a downstream intervention. It was a reaction. It was treating the symptom. Putting the cat back is an upstream intervention. It's taking the healthy cat that tells you there's a food source there, and it's solving the food source by putting a healthy cat sterilized to eat that food and not turn it into kittens. And the same thing with this. When we work within our capacity, when we are not so overwhelmed with kittens that we don't have the time to chase down chickpea and make sure that we find the mother and sterilize her, then we are doomed to continually repeat that cycle. When we discipline ourselves and set boundaries with our community, which can be hard to do, so that we are working within capacity, then we have the time to do the upstream intervention, which reduces the need for our work. Next month, next year, and over the next decade. And it triggers a positive cycle that is what we have seen with return to field. And I think it has the potential to do the exact same thing by giving kittens the right outcome and not bringing them into the shelter for care, unless that is the absolute best match for that individual sick, injured kitten's needs.
Okay, so this last question, and we really are out of time, but it brings us back to where we started, which is that we are not diverting the work that we're doing. We're diverting where we're spending our resources. I don't think anybody on this call is doing this alone. Hannah, I don't think you're out there trapping all these cats and monitoring these kittens as a one-woman show, as great as you are. So any recommendations on FIV? Oh, sorry, wrong one. Any ideas to redirect or help on-site volunteers still feel valuable when they can't socialize kittens in the shelter? So we have all these volunteers. Okay, they get in our shelter and socialize cats. What can they be doing?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things you could be doing. There's so many ways to be a cat, which means there's so many ways to help a cat. And there's something for everyone.
Love that answer.
There's so many ways to help. I'm assuming this is a question about maybe people who help at shelters but are not foster parents, maybe can't have animals in their home. Obviously, fostering is always a huge way to help. But even if you can't, we have volunteers who just do transport for us, who just take the cat back after the neuter or take the cat to the clinic to be neutered. We have volunteers who, there's so many different administrative tasks you could have people doing. If you do have a return to field program, we have volunteers. We're the return partner for our local shelter, and so our volunteers do returns for the shelter. Transport is a huge, huge piece. What else would you say?
I also think, I was just talking to my friends who have a puppy, and they were surprised at how effective obedience training was online. And so a terrific goal for skilled kitten socializers would be to provide video support and phone support who are socializing kittens, because that takes a little manic, and they could watch, on a socialization session and maybe help that way.
I love that. Counseling is so great. Sorry, Mandy, go ahead.
We're going to get kicked off. I just want to really quickly address, there were a few more questions. One of them very important on FIV and FELV. We're going to answer those in the resources that come out in your email. We don't want to miss that question. It's important. But Hannah, can you take us home really quick?
Sure. Okay. All right. So just want to mention.
I know, Kate, we could do this all day.
I know. Just want to mention a couple other things, places that you can find resources. I do have a kitten care webinar series. It's 4 parts that I did with in partnership with thank you. In partnership with Royal Canin. So if you do have kitten finders, kitten foster parents, you're welcome to send them to that to learn, kittenlady.org/webinar. I have a lot of resources. You can send people to learn about kitten care on my channel. This is something I think a lot of people don't know that I have, but kittenlady.org/booklet It's a free 12-page printed booklet. You can either download it as a PDF, or I will literally send you a pack of 50 of them to give to people who find kittens, available in English and Spanish. What else? Today's the 1 year.
Please, shelters, spend no time recreating these things. It just doesn't get better.
Thank you.
A manual, if you think you need a book, if you think you need a video, just go here first and divert those resources to something else, because it's right here.
Oh, I appreciate
Sorry.
that. It's the 1 year anniversary of my book coming out, so I had to stick that on there.
New York Times bestseller.
If anybody is looking for like a lot of resources about kitten care, you can find that here. Also wanted to mention a great Royal Canin partner, Crown Partners program. If you are working for a shelter and you want to access the food, the mother and baby cat is what I have fed kittens for years. I absolutely love it. They do have like larger professional bags that you can access. You get discounted pricing, 25% off pricing. And then a nice thing about it is it doesn't matter like how big or small of an order you want to do. You can do what works best for you. So all of that information, if you go to apply.royalcanin.com, you can start an account on there, and you can start getting deals there. So definitely really great for shelters and rescues. And then this is you, Mandy.
Next week, support for kittens in the field. How do we do this? We're going to keep talking about it. Dr. Julie Levy will be joining us exact same time, exact same day, right here on Maddie's platform. And we want to thank Maddie so much for hosting us. You always make us feel so welcome. Thanks for letting us move in again and crash here. We appreciate you. We love you. You make the Million Cat Challenge possible. You make this series possible. So sincere thank you to Maddie's. I know we went over. Thanks for not kicking us off. Everybody enjoy days, and we'll see you next Thursday. Thursdays have gone to the kittens.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.
Next week.